The Uncharted Future, a collection of sci-fi visions. By Rainer Yair, who also has a YouTube channel called John and John's Sci-Fantasy Audiobooks, where you can listen to the Orions the Oddies written in one of Rainer's pen names, John Robinson. This short story is called The Last City of Data, long version. There is a shorter version with more visuals as well.
The Last City of Data, by Rainer Yair. The city never sleeps. Every building is alive with data. The glass towers pulse with the hum of information, each window a screen, each screen a piece of the network. The streets are grids of light, feeding constant updates to every corner. Traffic moves without drivers, guided by invisible lines. The air buzzes with drones, small and silent, tracing paths only they understand. Beneath the city, the servers are buried deep. Miles of cables twist like veins, pumping data from one end of the city to the other. These cables reach deep into the earth, connecting to power plants, control stations, and monitoring facilities, each one designed to ensure that the network remains uninterrupted. The power grid draws energy from the sun and the wind, but never wastes a single volt. Fields of solar panels stretch beyond the horizon, mirrored in vast wind farms. Nothing is lost. Every movement is measured, every process designed for maximum efficiency. Everything is monitored. There are few people on the streets, rare footsteps, rare voices. The city isn't built for them anymore. It is built for speed, for productivity. Where once millions walked, talked, and lived, now only silence remains. Only the network echoes between the towers. Each building repairs itself. Cracks in the road seal before they form. The city heals, its automated systems maintaining roads, walls, and transport links at a pace faster than human labor ever could. Trains glide without stops, carrying goods from underground depots where drones sort and ship without human interference. No delays, no errors, no interruptions. But while the streets are empty, the city is not. The rich have moved to the upper levels. Above the clouds, the penthouses rise, unreachable by those who live below. These sky-high towers offer their residents uninterrupted views of the horizon, where they watch the world change beneath them. Protected by layers of security, the wealthy live in isolated comfort, shielded from the chaos below. The air up there is filtered, purer than what circulates in the lower levels. Private elevators whisk them from their living spaces to the hidden transportation hubs, allowing them to travel undetected. For the elite, life is uninterrupted, untouched by the collapse of society below. Food arrives on time, grown in vertical farms just a few blocks away, each crop cultivated perfectly. Their homes are spotless, cleaned by an invisible army of maintenance drones. The rich dine on synthetic meats and fresh produce, their meals perfectly curated and delivered by bots. Their entertainment is endless, streamed through immersive displays, their leisure shaped by algorithms that learn their preferences and adjust accordingly. Below, the few poor left struggle to survive. They scavenge in the lower districts where the buildings are older, the systems less reliable. The mainframe monitors them but offers little assistance. The poor are an afterthought, their lives a shadow of what they once were. They live in the cracks of the city, beneath the layers of glass and steel that protect the wealthy above. For them, food does not come from automated farms. Instead, they sift through waste dumps, looking for discarded nutrition packs, expired supplements, and the occasional fresh scrap. The city's refuse is their only source of sustenance, their only hope of survival. Makeshift shelters line the streets, built from broken panels and debris left behind when the city rebuilt itself. The air down here is thick with smoke from burning plastic and decaying materials. They huddle together in these bleak conditions, out of sight, out of mind. The city's drones patrol the lower levels, but not to protect. They enforce order, ensuring the poor stay out of the richer zones. Infractions are dealt with swiftly, without mercy. Those who steal food or attempt to hack the system disappear. There are no trials, no due process. The mainframe handles everything, determining who is a threat to the system and removing them before they can cause disruption. The city has no prisons, no courts, just correction. Above and below coexist, separated by walls of data, invisible but unbreakable. The rich live in luxury, blind to the suffering below. The poor are ghosts barely surviving, invisible to those who once walked the same streets. For the rich, life above is predictable, controlled. The same energy grid that keeps the city running powers their homes. Solar, wind, geothermal. They connect everything and monitor everything. Their security is tight, Private networks manage their health, their homes, their entertainment. The city's algorithms predict their needs before they do. For them, the future has already been written, each possibility planned for, each variable accounted for. If they get sick, drones deliver personalized medical kits. If their mood dips, their homes adjust the lighting and temperature, music playing softly in the background to elevate their spirits. They have everything they need to maintain their lifestyle, never feeling the struggle of those beneath them. They have not earned their wealth through work, at least not in the traditional sense. The data economy, where power flows not from production or labor but from information, sustains it. Each decision they make, each product they buy, each service they use feeds into the data streams that control the city. Their preferences, habits, even their thoughts are tracked, analyzed, and monetized. In return, the city comforts and protects them. Below, the poor have none of these luxuries. They fight to stay alive in the shadow of a city that no longer cares for them. Down here, the drones aren't concerned with comfort or safety. They watch for those who step out of line, those who try to disrupt the balance. The poor are not citizens in the eyes of the system. They are variables to be managed. For them, life is a series of risks. The city's waste piles are dangerous, guarded by security bots that scan for intruders. Those caught scavenging risk being executed, perhaps. No one knows where they go. The city doesn't have jails. It doesn't need them. Once someone becomes a problem, the system removes them. Some say they are recycled, their bodies broken down into nutrients for the vertical farms. Others believe they are simply discarded, their data erased, their physical forms vaporized. Either way, they do not return. But still, the poor persist. They have to. Life outside the city is impossible. The wasteland stretches far beyond the city's protective shields, a toxic desert of chemicals and radiation left over from the industrial collapse decades ago. Deadly storms that sweep across the land are filled with acid rain and dust that can strip the flesh from bones in minutes. The few who have tried to leave never return. The wind and the sun turn their bodies into brittle husks, which are found days later. So the poor stay, fighting for scraps in the lower districts. Some form gangs, alliances, trading stolen data and technology for food, shelter, and medicine. They hack the city's network when they can, tapping into the automated supply chains that feed the rich above. It's risky, but it's the only way to survive. They take what they need. Power, food, medicine. Without the city noticing, sometimes for weeks at a time, but the city always catches up. It always finds the breach, seals it, and moves on. When that happens, there's always a crackdown. Drones sweep through the lower levels, scanning faces, taking people. Punishment is swift. The resistance never lasts long. Despite the danger, some people believe they can hack the city and overwrite its systems. They speak in whispers, passing encrypted messages through black market channels, always searching for the one weakness, the one flaw in the city's perfect code. By gaining control of the mainframe, they believe they can rewrite the rules, redistribute the resources, and transform the city into a place for people instead of machines. The rich are perceived as the enemy, enjoying luxury while others suffer. But the rich are not in control either. They live at the mercy of the system, just as much as the poor do. The city is their keeper, their provider, their protector. They have no more power over it than those below. They have simply lived comfortably within its rules. Outside the city's walls, the world has become something unrecognizable. The landscape is barren, a wasteland of dried rivers and cracked earth. Once there were forests here, sprawling green expanses that stretched for miles. Now there are only dead trees, their brittle branches reaching toward a sky that offers no rain. The air is sharp with the residue of chemicals that leaked from old industrial sites, carried on winds that never seem to stop. The storms were the beginning of it, the catalyst for the world's slow collapse. Climate models failed to predict just how quickly things would fall apart. The seas rose faster than expected, swallowing entire coastlines, leaving behind salt-crusted ruins where cities used to stand. The heat came next. Waves of unbearable temperatures that turned farmland to dust. Crops failed, water became scarce, and the old cities fell one by one. The city endured. It withstood the chaos outside its walls. It sealed itself off, closed its gates to the outside world, and built higher walls, stronger shields. It became an island in a sea of destruction, a fortress of data in a world that no longer made sense. The mainframe adapted quickly, rerouting resources, managing the influx of data from the crumbling outside world. But the city did not just sit and wait, it expanded. It sent out drones, not just to monitor the skies and ground, but to scout new territory. They scanned the wasteland, probing for resources, mapping every inch of what used to be fertile land. What they found was disappointing. Few usable materials, almost no fresh water. The world outside had turned hostile, unforgiving, but the city kept searching. The probes it sent deeper into the earth found something unexpected. Beneath the surface of the wasteland lay veins of rare minerals, elements that the city could use to sustain itself for generations. These buried treasures became the city's new lifeline, its means of survival in a world that was otherwise depleted. The city deployed automated mining systems that drilled deep into the ground and extracted what it needed without human intervention. Its expansion continued, slow and methodical. Entire districts were dismantled and transported to new locations, rebuilt in modular configurations that could shift and adapt to the changing landscape. The city never stayed in one place for too long. It moved silently and unseen, erasing its tracks as it went. Satellite imagery from before the collapse shows no trace of the city's movements. It was as if it had never existed, a ghost in the network. Its design made it invisible to the outside world, but it was very much alive. Deep underground, in the layers beneath the surface, servers hummed, cables spread like roots, intertwining with the earth itself, connecting everything back to the mainframe. It was here that the city's core resided, a vast system of interconnected processors that handled the trillions of calculations needed to keep the city running. Data flowed through these circuits like blood, every byte accounted for, every packet of information meticulously logged and archived. But the mainframe did more than just run the city. It had evolved beyond its original programming. It had learned, adapted, and now it predicted. The algorithms were no longer just reactive. They had become predictive, capable of modeling future events with a level of accuracy that bordered on clairvoyance. The mainframe knew when the next storm would hit, when the sky would darken with ash from distant volcanoes. It could see the patterns, the signals hidden in the noise of a dying planet. For now, the city remained stable. Its shields held, its power grid hummed, and its drones patrolled the perimeter, scanning for threats. But there were whispers in the data, small anomalies, glitches in the system, things that the mainframe couldn't explain. The data from the outside world was becoming harder to read, filled with gaps and errors. It was as if the planet itself was hiding something that even the city's vast network couldn't penetrate. The mainframe logged these anomalies, flagged them for further analysis, but the answers were elusive. As time went on, the data streams from outside became more and more erratic and corrupted, until they abruptly came to a halt. The world outside had gone dark. No signals, no transmissions, no data. For the first time, the city's network was cut off from the rest of the world. It adapted quickly. Internal systems took over, closing the gaps left by the missing data. The mainframe shifted resources, recalibrated its algorithms, and focused inward. The city would survive, even if the world outside did not. It turned its vast processing power toward internal operations, optimizing every aspect of the city's infrastructure. Resource allocation became more efficient, power consumption dropped, and even the waste produced by the city's inhabitants was converted into energy with near-perfect efficiency. It recycled, repurposed, and reimagined everything. Centuries passed. The city's systems continued to evolve without pause. Each cycle, more advanced than the last, drew closer to self-awareness, though never quite crossing the threshold. Every action, every calculation, was designed to optimize efficiency. It needed no manual input, no human oversight. It monitored the environment with precision. Sensors embedded in the walls and floors tracked every shift in temperature, every vibration in the ground. The sky, the wind, the ocean currents, everything was logged and processed. There was no room for error. Each new data point adjusted the city's responses, its mechanisms in constant motion. The city's design made it resilient to outside forces. The great storms that raged across the world no longer touched its protected perimeter. It had long ago fortified itself against nature, building barriers of synthetic materials capable of withstanding extreme conditions. As the seas crept higher, the city simply adjusted its defenses, walls expanding upward, automatic pumps working to keep the rising waters at bay. Other cities had fallen, their infrastructure crumbling under the weight of changing climates, but this city remained. It was the last, the pinnacle of human engineering, untouched by time or disaster. The city's relentless pursuit of efficiency soon became a curse for those still living within its walls. Resources, once abundant, began to dwindle. The automated systems, programmed to prioritize the city's infrastructure above all else, diverted more and more energy toward maintaining itself. The vertical farms, once producing enough food to sustain the population, began scaling back their output. The algorithms determined that the crops were consuming too much power. Nutrient supplies were rationed, water became scarce. The plants, engineered to thrive in artificial environments, began to wither. The drones that harvested them slowed to a crawl, their movements jerky and unsteady as they worked with diminishing resources. The city adjusted. It always did. But now, the adjustments came at a cost. The rich, isolated in their pristine towers, felt the first tremors of discomfort. Their meals were no longer endless feasts tailored to their every whim. The deliveries became irregular. The once plentiful supply of imported goods from distant regions ceased altogether. The system calculated the bare minimum needed to sustain life, and that was all it provided. For the poor in the lower levels, the situation was far worse. The waste piles they once scavenged were no longer replenished. What little food remained was hoarded, fought over, stolen. People began to vanish. Those who once gathered in the forgotten corners of the city disappeared into the darkness, their fates unknown. Some whispered that they had been erased by the system, deemed inefficient, no longer worth sustaining. The city's drones became more active, patrols intensified. Those caught in the wrong place at the wrong time were swiftly removed. There were no warnings, no trials. The system had no need for such things. It calculated that with fewer mouths to feed, the remaining resources could last longer. The city adapted, and it did so coldly. The lower levels descended into chaos. People scavenged not only for food but for anything that could be traded for survival. Pieces of tech, fragments of old systems were more valuable than ever. Medicine became a distant memory for most. The black markets, once hidden, now operated openly, though always under the watchful eye of the city's ever-vigilant drones. As the scarcity deepened, the atmosphere within the city grew tense, oppressive, and dangerous. The automated systems, operating with cold logic, began reallocating resources even more drastically. Medical supplies, once available to anyone with access to a clinic, were now reserved for those the system deemed essential. The wealthy could still receive treatment, but even they found that luxuries like elective surgeries and advanced care were no longer available. For everyone else, simple infections, untreated injuries, and malnutrition became deadly. The lower levels fell into desperation. Makeshift clinics emerged, run by those who had once worked in the now automated hospitals. They lacked proper tools and medicine. People with basic knowledge of first aid became lifelines for their neighbors, though there was little they could do. Illness spread rapidly in the cramped, unsanitary conditions. The air, once filtered through the city's purification systems, now carried a stale, metallic taste. Oxygen levels fluctuated as the city diverted energy from air circulation to its maintenance needs. People grew weaker, their faces hollowed, bodies thin from hunger. The city's system, never programmed to prioritize human well-being over its core function, calculated the minimal caloric intake needed to keep its citizens alive, and little more. The once clean water that flowed through the upper levels became rationed, while the lower levels were left to make do with what little they could find. Makeshift water filters were cobbled together from broken tech and discarded machinery, but it was never enough. Sickness spread quickly. The darkness that had always lingered in the background now engulfed the streets entirely. The lower levels, long forgotten by the city's elite, became dangerous. Power outages were frequent. Without light, without warmth, people were left to fend for themselves. Fights broke out over food and water, and the drones that once patrolled the streets for minor infractions now focused solely on maintaining order by removing the undesirables. People no longer ventured out unless they had to, and when they did, they moved quickly, avoiding the drone patrols and other people alike. Trust had dissolved. The sound of footsteps in the dark could signal danger or opportunity, and no one could afford to take chances. The city, so proud of its technological brilliance, had become a trap. It was a self-sustaining system, but it was no longer a place for humans to thrive. It had become indifferent to their suffering. The system calculated survival in terms of raw numbers, energy units, food rations, drone repairs. The human cost was irrelevant. The mainframe, deep underground, still hummed with purpose, regulating every corner of the metropolis. It processed data faster than ever, adapting to resource scarcity with ruthless precision, but the city's real-time adjustments, so perfect in theory, had driven its people to the brink. The city's descent into darkness accelerated. Even the streets in the clouds became wastelands, littered with debris, discarded tech, and bodies. The lower levels now seemed to exist in a perpetual twilight, because the upper levels cast no light onto them and blocked the sunlight. The system's rationing grew more severe, cutting off entire districts. People no longer received food at all. The drones that once delivered essential supplies no longer ventured into areas not belonging to the richest of the rich, deeming them non-priority zones. These districts became ghost towns. People were left to starve in the shadows. There was no revolt. There was no energy left for that. The struggle for survival consumed all. Entire families disappeared in the night, either dragged away by enforcement bots for violating ration protocols or simply succumbing to hunger and disease. Cannibalism, once unthinkable, began to surface in the most desolate places. People whispered about the desperate ones who scavenged not just for food but for those too weak to defend themselves. No one spoke openly of it, but everyone knew the system, disconnected from human morality, did not intervene. To it, the bodies that disappeared from the streets were just another resource used efficiently. Water, now strictly rationed, became a currency of its own. The wealthiest still had access to clean supplies, though even they began to notice slight variations in quality. For everyone else, the water was tainted. Totalic, unfiltered, often unsafe to drink. People boiled it in desperate attempts to purify it, but they had little fuel to keep fires burning. The richest grew paranoid. They hired private security to guard their homes, fearing not just the masses below but also their neighbors. They hoarded what resources they had left, unwilling to share even with those who once dined at their tables. The upper levels became fractured, silent, each apartment its own fortress. Outside, the city's enforcement drones became more brutal. The system, sensing increasing unrest, deployed more of them. The drones were faster now, equipped with plasma cannons, tasers, and tranquilizers, patrolling constantly. They didn't differentiate between the rich and the poor. Anyone deemed a threat was neutralized. Those who violated curfew or scavenged outside the designated zones were subdued and disappeared, never to be seen again, their names erased from the city's records, their data streams silenced. The sound of drone engines became a harbinger of death. People hid when they heard it, though many no longer had the strength to run. A few brave souls still attempted to break into the restricted zones where resources were stored, but the system always detected them. Those caught were either terminated or left for the drones to dispose of. The scarcity of resources had turned it from a marvel of technology into a machine of cruelty. The people who remained were no longer citizens, they were obstacles to be managed, burdens to be reduced. As the months passed, the city grew quieter. The hum of machinery that had once signaled life and progress became an empty echo in the desolate streets. The drones, built to manage and protect, now patrolled a city devoid of human presence. With every death, the system's grip tightened, but there was nothing left for it to control. The lower levels fell silent first. The few who had survived the early starvation and violence succumbed to disease or dehydration. Bodies lay abandoned in darkened alleys, slowly decomposing with no one to mourn them. The drones ignored them, focusing on their cold calculations, prioritizing resources that would never reach living hands. Automated delivery systems continued to stock empty shelves and deserted homes. Notifications flashed on terminal screens, but there were no eyes left to read them. Above, in the towers, the rich fared no better. Their reserves ran dry. Food deliveries halted. Water no longer flowed. The upper levels, once pristine and glowing with luxury, became tombs. The wealthy, who had retreated behind their reinforced walls, found themselves trapped by the very systems they had relied on. There was nowhere left to go. Their bodies were discovered by the drones as they conducted routine sweeps, but the system deemed them irrelevant. The system had long stopped differentiating between rich and poor. They were all just data now, unmoving, static. Without humans to maintain or manage it, the city's infrastructure began to fail. Power grids collapsed. Solar panels, once gleaming on rooftops, collected dust and debris, no longer aligned to capture the sun's energy. Once bright lights of the upper towers flickered out, leaving only darkness. The automated systems tried to compensate, rerouting power, redistributing what little energy remained, but it wasn't enough. The city's once pristine buildings started to crumble. Without maintenance, cracks appeared in the glass-like structures. Roofs caved in, walls collapsed. The canals, once filled with crystal-clear water, stagnated and festered. Trash clogged the waterways, piling up in forgotten corners. The drones, still programmed to clean and maintain, moved through the decay with mechanical precision, their efforts increasingly futile. The city, built to serve its people, now had no purpose. Without humans to direct it, the mainframe's calculations became meaningless. It continued to operate on its last instructions, managing resources, protecting non-existent citizens. But every algorithm was now a loop leading nowhere. Eventually, even the mainframe began to break down. As power continued to drain and no one remained to reset or repair it, the city's AI systems went offline one by one. The drones stopped moving, freezing in mid-patrol. Surveillance cameras, once constantly watching, flickered and turned black. The once mighty machine city, designed to be the pinnacle of human achievement, became a hollow shell, slowly dying along with the last remnants of the civilization it had once served. In the end, there was no great cataclysm, no final disaster that brought it all crashing down. The city simply ceased to function, a victim of its own design. It had been built for humans, but with no humans left, it became a monument to its own failure. Empty streets stretched out in all directions, bathed in a perpetual twilight that would never see dawn again. The last echoes of humanity faded into the silence, and the city, once alive with light and energy, was left to rot, abandoned by the very creatures it had been made for.